Sarah Martinez had always been a careful mother. She made sure her 12-year-old son Jake wore his helmet when he rode his bike. She checked his homework every night. She packed healthy lunches and drove him to soccer practice twice a week. But on that sunny Tuesday afternoon in March, all her careful planning could not stop what was about to happen. Jake had been skateboarding with his friends after school. It was something he did every day. The neighborhood had a small skate park just 2 blocks from their house. Sarah had worried about it at first, but Jake was good at skateboarding. He had been doing it for 3 years. He knew how to fall safely. He always wore his protective gear. That day started like any other. Jake came home from school and grabbed his skateboard from the garage. He called out to his mother that he was going to the park with his friends Tommy and Marcus. Sarah was in the kitchen making dinner. She called back that he needed to be home by 6 o'clock. "I will, Mom," Jake said. Those were the last words he spoke as a boy who could walk. At the skate park, Jake was trying a new trick. He had been practicing it for weeks. It was called a kickflip. He had done it many times before, but this time something went wrong. His skateboard hit a small crack in the concrete. Jake lost his balance. He fell backward and landed hard on his back. At first, Jake thought he was just winded. He lay on the ground trying to catch his breath. Tommy and Marcus ran over to help him up. But when Jake tried to move his legs, nothing happened. He could not feel them. "He could not move them, guys," Jake said, his voice shaking. "I can't feel my legs." Tommy thought Jake was joking at first. Jake was always making jokes. But when he looked at his friend's face, he knew this was serious. Marcus was already pulling out his phone to call 911. The ambulance arrived in 8 minutes. To Jake, it felt like 8 hours. He lay on the concrete, afraid to move. The paramedics were kind but serious. They put a brace around his neck and carefully moved him onto a stretcher. Jake kept asking if he would be okay. The paramedics said the doctors would take good care of him. Sarah was still cooking dinner when her phone rang. The caller ID showed the hospital's number. Her heart stopped. "No parent wants to get a call from the hospital. Mrs. Martinez," the voice said. "This is Dr. Chen from City General Hospital. Your son Jake has been in an accident. You need to come here right away." Sarah dropped the wooden spoon she was holding. It clattered to the floor. "Is he okay?" she asked. "Please tell me he's okay." "He's stable," Dr. Chen said. "But you need to come now." Sarah grabbed her keys and ran to her car. The drive to the hospital was the longest 20 minutes of her life. She kept thinking about all the things that could be wrong. A broken arm? A concussion? She never imagined it would be something that would change their lives forever. At the hospital, Sarah ran to the emergency room. A nurse took her to a small room where Dr. Chen was waiting. He was a kind-looking man with gray hair and gentle eyes. But his face was serious. "Mrs. Martinez," he said softly. "Please sit down." Sarah did not want to sit down. She wanted to see her son. "Where is Jake?" she asked. "I want to see Jake." "You can see him in a few minutes," Dr. Chen said. "But first I need to explain what happened." The doctor told Sarah that Jake had hurt his spinal cord. The fall had damaged the nerves in his back. The injury was at the level of his second lumbar vertebra. Sarah did not understand all the medical words, but she understood what it meant. Jake could not move his legs. "He might never walk again, are you sure?" Sarah asked. "Maybe it's just temporary. Maybe when the swelling goes down." Dr. Chen shook his head. "We did an MRI scan. The damage is severe." "I'm very sorry." Sarah felt like the room was spinning. This could not be happening. Not to her Jake. Not to her happy, active boy who loved skateboarding and soccer and running around with his friends. When Sarah finally saw Jake, he was lying in a hospital bed with wires and tubes attached to him. His face was pale, but he tried to smile when he saw her. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. Sarah sat beside his bed and took his hand. She wanted to cry, but she knew she had to be strong for Jake. "The doctor says I hurt my back pretty bad," Jake said. "He says I might not be able to walk for a while." Sarah squeezed his hand. "We'll figure it out," she said. "Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together." Jake spent 2 weeks in the hospital and then 3 months in a rehabilitation center. Sarah took time off work to be with him. She learned about spinal cord injuries and wheelchairs and physical therapy. She watched her son work harder than any 12-year-old should have to work, just to do simple things like transfer from his bed to his wheelchair. Jake was brave. He made friends with the other patients. He joked with the nurses. He worked hard in physical therapy. But sometimes late at night, Sarah would hear him crying in his room. Those were the hardest moments for her. The rehabilitation center taught Jake how to live in a wheelchair. He learned how to transfer himself. He learned how to navigate curbs and stairs. He got stronger and more confident every day. But Sarah knew that bringing him home would be a challenge. Their house had 3 concrete steps leading to the front door. There was no ramp. There was no way for Jake to get into his own home without help. "Don't worry about it, Mom," Jake said when she mentioned it. "Tommy and Marcus can help me up the steps." But Sarah knew that was not a real solution. Jake needed to be independent. He needed to be able to come and go from his house like any other kid. He had already lost so much. She was not going to let him lose his independence too. On the day Jake came home from rehabilitation, Sarah's brother Mike and 2 of his friends carried Jake up the front steps in his wheelchair. Jake was happy to be home, but Sarah could see the frustration in his eyes. This was not how it should be. That night, after Jake went to bed, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with her laptop. She started researching wheelchair ramps. She looked at different designs and materials. She read about building codes and permits. She was going to build her son a ramp. She was going to make sure he could access his own home with dignity and independence. Sarah had no idea that this decision would lead to the biggest fight of her life. Sarah spent the next 3 days learning everything she could about wheelchair ramps. She read websites, watched YouTube videos, and called the city planning office to ask about permits. She discovered that building a ramp was more complicated than she had thought. The ramp had to follow strict rules. It could not be too steep. For every inch of height, the ramp needed to be 12 inches long. Since their front steps were 18 inches high, the ramp would need to be 18 feet long. It also needed handrails and a flat area at the top and bottom. Sarah called 5 different contractors to get estimates. The prices ranged from $3,000 to $8,000. Sarah did not have that much money saved up. Jake's medical bills had already used most of their savings. But she was not going to give up. The 3rd contractor she called was a man named Bill Rodriguez. He had been building ramps and accessible modifications for 20 years. When Sarah explained her situation, Bill's voice became gentle. "I have a son too," he said. "I can't imagine what you're going through. Let me come take a look and see what we can do." Bill came to Sarah's house the next afternoon. Jake was at physical therapy, so Sarah was alone when she showed Bill the front steps. Bill measured everything carefully and took notes on a small pad. "Here's what I'm thinking," Bill said. "We can build a beautiful ramp that will blend in with your house. I can use pressure-treated lumber with a nice stain to match your front porch. It will look like it was always meant to be there." Sarah liked Bill immediately. He did not talk down to her or make her feel like she was asking for charity. He treated the ramp like it was the most important project in the world. "How much will it cost?" Sarah asked, holding her breath. Bill looked at his notes. "Normally, a project like this would cost about $5,000. But I tell you what, I just finished a big job and I have some leftover materials. If you can pay for the permits and the hardware, I'll donate my labor. That should bring the cost down to about $1,500. Sarah felt tears in her eyes. "Why would you do that for us?" Bill smiled. "Because every kid deserves to come home to their own house," he said. That evening, Sarah sat down with Jake to discuss the ramp. She had been worried about how he would feel about it. She did not want him to think it made him different or drew attention to his disability. "A ramp would be awesome," Jake said without hesitation. "Then I won't have to wait for someone to help me. I can come and go whenever I want." Sarah was relieved. She had been overthinking it. To Jake, the ramp was not a symbol of his disability. It was a symbol of his independence. The next morning, Sarah went to the city planning office to apply for a building permit. The clerk, a middle-aged woman named Janet, was very helpful. She explained that ramps for disabled access were usually approved quickly, as long as they met safety requirements. "You'll need to submit the plans and pay a permit fee of $150, Janet said. "We should have an answer for you within a week." Bill had already drawn up simple plans for the ramp. Sarah submitted them along with her payment. Now all she had to do was wait. While they waited for the permit, Sarah started preparing for the construction. She called her homeowner's insurance company to make sure the ramp would be covered. She arranged to take time off work during the construction. She even started looking at outdoor stain colors to match their house. Jake was excited about the ramp too. He drew pictures of how he thought it would look. He asked Bill questions about construction when Bill came by to double-check his measurements. Sarah could see that Jake felt involved in the project, and that made her happy. The permit was approved in 6 days. Janet from the planning office called Sarah personally to give her the good news. "The inspector will need to do a final check when the ramp is finished," Janet said. "But everything looks good to go." Bill started work on the following Monday. He arrived at 7 in the morning with a truck full of lumber and tools. The first day was spent preparing the ground and setting the foundation posts. Bill worked carefully and methodically. He explained each step to Sarah and Jake. "The foundation is the most important part," Bill told Jake. "If the foundation is strong, the whole ramp will be strong." Jake watched from his wheelchair as Bill used a level to make sure everything was perfectly straight. Sarah brought Bill coffee and sandwiches throughout the day. She had never watched construction work before, and she found it fascinating. By the end of the first day, the basic frame of the ramp was in place. Sarah could already picture Jake using it. The ramp started at the sidewalk and curved gently up to their front porch. It looked professional and clean. The second day, Bill installed the decking and handrails. He used special screws that would not rust over time. He sanded every piece of wood until it was smooth. He wanted to make sure Jake would never get a splinter. "This ramp needs to last for many years," Bill explained to Sarah. "Jake is going to use it thousands of times. It has to be perfect." On the third day, Bill applied the stain. Sarah had chosen a color called cedar tone that matched the trim on their house perfectly. As the stain dried, the ramp began to look like it had always been part of the house. Jake could barely contain his excitement. "Can I try it now?" he asked every hour. "Not until it's completely finished and inspected," Sarah said. But she was just as excited as Jake was. On Thursday morning, the city inspector came to check the ramp. His name was Tom Williams, and he had been doing building inspections for 15 years. He measured the slope of the ramp with a special tool. He checked the handrails to make sure they were strong. He tested every bolt and screw. "This is excellent work," Tom told Sarah. "This ramp meets all safety requirements and then some. Your contractor really knows what he's doing." Tom gave Sarah a certificate showing that the ramp had passed inspection. The ramp was now officially approved and legal. That afternoon, Jake tried his ramp for the first time. Sarah, Bill, and several neighbors had gathered to watch. Jake positioned his wheelchair at the bottom of the ramp. He took a deep breath and began to push himself up. The ramp was perfect. Jake moved smoothly up the gentle slope. The handrails were exactly the right height for him to use if he needed them. When he reached the top, he turned around and smiled at everyone. "This is amazing," Jake called out. "I can't believe it's ours." Jake spent the next hour going up and down the ramp. He practiced going fast and slow. He tried using the handrails and not using them. He was like a kid with a new toy. That evening, after Bill had packed up his tools and the neighbors had gone home, Sarah sat on the front porch watching Jake practice on his ramp. Her son looked happier than he had since the accident. For the first time in months, Sarah felt like they were moving forward instead of just surviving. "Thank you, Mom," Jake said as he wheeled up the ramp one more time. "This is the best thing ever." Sarah smiled. The ramp had cost more money than she could really afford, but seeing Jake's independence and confidence return was worth every penny. She had no idea that in just 3 weeks someone would try to take it all away. For 3 wonderful weeks, life in the Martinez household felt almost normal again. Jake used his ramp every morning to go to school and every afternoon when he came home. He had regained his independence, and Sarah could see his confidence growing every day. The ramp had become a natural part of their daily routine. Sarah had almost forgotten that they lived in a neighborhood with a homeowners association. The Pine Valley HOA had never bothered her before. She paid her yearly dues and followed the basic rules about keeping her lawn neat and her garbage cans out of sight. She had never had any problems. That changed on a Thursday morning in early May. Sarah was getting ready for work when she heard the mail truck stop outside. She grabbed her coffee mug and walked to the mailbox to get the mail. Mixed in with the usual bills and advertisements was a certified letter. Sarah had to sign for it. The return address said Pine Valley Homeowners Association. Sarah felt a small knot form in her stomach. Certified letters were never good news. She waited until she got to work to open the letter. She sat in her car in the parking lot and tore open the envelope. The letter was typed on official HOA letterhead. It was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Martinez, even though Sarah was a single mother. Jake's father had left when Jake was 3 years old. The letter was signed by someone named Linda Hoffman, who called herself the Architectural Compliance Officer. Sarah had never heard of Linda Hoffman. She had never heard of an architectural compliance officer either. The letter was short and to the point. Dear homeowners, it has come to my attention that you have installed an unauthorized structure on your property without proper HOA approval. The wheelchair ramp at 1247 Maple Street violates Section 4.2 of the Pine Valley HOA Architectural Guidelines, which states that all external modifications must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee before construction begins. This structure also violates Section 6.1 regarding maintaining neighborhood aesthetic standards. The ramp is an eyesore that negatively impacts property values for your neighbors. You have 30 days from the date of this letter to remove the unauthorized structure. Failure to comply will result in daily fines of $50 until the violation is corrected. If you believe this notice is in error, you may request a hearing with the HOA Board of Directors. However, I have personally inspected your property and documented the violation with photographs. Sincerely, Linda Hoffman, Architectural Compliance Officer, Pine Valley HOA. Sarah read the letter 3 times. She could not believe what she was reading. Someone wanted her to tear down Jake's ramp, the ramp that gave her son his independence, the ramp that they had gotten proper city permits for. Sarah's hands were shaking as she folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. She sat in her car for 10 minutes trying to process what had just happened. Then she called her office and told them she would be late. She needed to find out who Linda Hoffman was and what authority she had. Sarah drove home and immediately went to her computer. She looked up the Pine Valley HOA website. The website listed the current board members: Michael Chen as president, Patricia Walsh as vice president, Robert Thompson as treasurer, and Susan Kim as secretary. There was no mention of Linda Hoffman anywhere. Sarah called the HOA management company that handled administrative tasks for Pine Valley. The receptionist transferred her to a woman named Carol. "Hi, Carol," Sarah said. "I received a letter from someone named Linda Hoffman, who says she's the architectural compliance officer for Pine Valley HOA. Can you tell me about her role?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Linda Hoffman," Carol said slowly. "She's not an official HOA officer. She's just a resident who, well, she takes it upon herself to monitor the neighborhood for violations." "So she has no official authority?" Sarah asked. "That's correct," Carol said. "Only the elected board members have authority to issue violation notices. Linda sometimes sends letters, but they're not official HOA correspondence." Sarah felt a mix of relief and anger. Relief that Linda had no real power, and anger that someone was trying to intimidate her family with fake authority. "What should I do about this letter?" Sarah asked. "You can ignore it," Carol said. "But I should warn you that Linda is very persistent. She's been problematic for several years now." Sarah thanked Carol and hung up. She felt better knowing that Linda had no real authority, but she was still worried. Even if Linda could not legally force them to remove the ramp, she could still make their lives difficult. That afternoon, Sarah researched Linda Hoffman online. She found Linda's profile on the neighborhood social media page. Linda's profile picture showed a stern-looking woman in her 60s with short gray hair and a frown. Her posts were mostly complaints about various neighbors. She complained about people parking on the street. She complained about kids playing too loudly. She complained about Christmas decorations being left up too long. Sarah read through dozens of Linda's posts. It became clear that Linda saw herself as the unofficial neighborhood police. She took photos of minor violations and posted them online with angry comments. Many neighbors had responded to her posts with frustration and annoyance. Sarah also found posts where other neighbors complained about Linda. Someone named Mike Peterson wrote, "Linda needs to mind her own business. We're all adults here." A woman named Jennifer Adams wrote, "Linda, you're not the neighborhood sheriff. Please stop harassing people." It was clear that Linda was not popular in the neighborhood, but it was also clear that she was determined and relentless. Sarah printed out the HOA rules and regulations to understand what they actually said about architectural modifications. The rules were confusing and full of legal language, but one thing was clear. Ramps for disabled access were specifically mentioned as allowable modifications. Section 8.4 of the HOA rules stated, "Reasonable modifications for disabled access, including ramps, handrails, and widened doorways, are permitted in accordance with federal and state disability laws." Sarah felt vindicated. The ramp was not only legal under city codes, but it was specifically allowed under HOA rules too. When Jake came home from school, Sarah showed him the letter. She had debated whether to tell him about it, but she decided he had a right to know. Jake read the letter quietly. When he finished, he looked up at his mother with worried eyes. "Are they going to make us tear down my ramp?" he asked. Sarah sat down beside her son's wheelchair and took his hands. "No," she said firmly. "They are not going to tear down your ramp. This woman has no authority to make us do anything. The ramp is legal and it's staying." "But what if she keeps bothering us?" Jake asked. Sarah looked at her brave 12-year-old son who had already been through so much. "Then we'll deal with it," she said. "But Jake, I want you to remember something. You have every right to access your own home. That ramp is not just a piece of wood. It's your independence, and nobody has the right to take that away from you." Jake nodded, but Sarah could see he was still worried. She was worried too, but she was also angry. Some busybody neighbor thought she could intimidate a disabled child and his mother. Linda Hoffman had picked the wrong family to mess with. That evening, Sarah called Bill Rodriguez to tell him about the letter. Bill was quiet for a moment after she read it to him. "Sarah," he said finally, "I've been building ramps for 20 years. I've dealt with HOA complaints before. Most of the time they back down when they realize the ramp is legal and necessary. But some people are just bullies who like to pick on families when they're vulnerable." "What should I do?" Sarah asked. "Document everything," Bill said. "Keep that letter. Take photos of your ramp and your permits. And don't let them intimidate you. That ramp is legal and Jake needs it." Sarah went to bed that night feeling determined but anxious. She had no idea that Linda Hoffman was just getting started and that the real confrontation was still to come. Sarah had hoped that ignoring Linda's letter would make the problem go away. She was wrong. 2 days after receiving the letter, Sarah was in her kitchen making breakfast when she heard voices outside. She looked out the window and saw a woman with short gray hair standing in her front yard with a measuring tape and a camera. It was 7:30 in the morning. Jake was still getting ready for school. Sarah quickly walked outside to see what was happening. "Excuse me," Sarah called out. "Can I help you?" The woman looked up from her measuring tape. She was exactly what Sarah had expected from her social media photos. A stern-faced woman in her 60s wearing a crisp white blouse and dark pants. She carried herself like someone who was used to being in charge. "I'm Linda Hoffman," the woman said without smiling. "I'm the Architectural Compliance Officer for Pine Valley HOA. I'm documenting the violation on your property." Sarah felt her heart rate increase, but she kept her voice calm. "You're on my property without permission," she said. "You need to leave," Linda snorted. "This is HOA business," she said. "I have every right to inspect violations. This ramp is 18.2 feet long and violates the aesthetic standards of our community." "The ramp is completely legal," Sarah said. "I have all the proper permits from the city." Linda waved her hand dismissively. "City permits don't matter for HOA violations. This structure is an eyesore and it's bringing down property values for everyone in the neighborhood." Sarah took a deep breath. "The ramp is for my disabled son. It's his only way to access our home independently." Linda's expression did not change. "That's unfortunate, but it doesn't give you special privileges. The rules apply to everyone equally." At that moment, Jake appeared at the top of the ramp in his wheelchair. He was dressed for school and ready to leave. When he saw the strange woman in their yard with a camera, he stopped. "Who's that, Mom?" Jake called out. Linda looked up at Jake and her expression became even more stern. "You must be the boy who had the accident," she said loudly. "You should have been more careful on that skateboard. Now your family thinks they can ignore community rules because of your poor choices." Sarah felt like she had been slapped. She could not believe that an adult had just blamed a 12-year-old for his disability. She looked up at Jake and saw the hurt and confusion on his face. "Get off my property right now," Sarah said, her voice shaking with anger. Linda smiled coldly. "Or what, you'll call the police?" "I'm conducting official HOA business." "You have no official authority," Sarah said. "I called the management company. You're just a busybody neighbor with a camera." Linda's face turned red. "We'll see about that," she said. "You have 46 days left to remove this eyesore. After that, you'll be paying $50 a day in fines until it's gone." Linda packed up her measuring tape and camera and walked away. Sarah stood in her yard, shaking with anger and disbelief. She looked up at Jake, who was still sitting at the top of the ramp. "Mom?" Jake said quietly. "Is she right?" Is this my fault? Sarah immediately went up the ramp to her son. Jake, listen to me very carefully, she said. Your accident was not your fault. You were being careful. Accidents happen, and that woman has no right to blame you for anything. Jake nodded, but Sarah could see that Linda's words had hurt him. She helped Jake get his backpack ready and walked with him to the school bus stop. As they waited for the bus, Jake was quieter than usual. Are you okay? Sarah asked. I just don't understand why she's so mean, Jake said. I never did anything to her. Sarah hugged her son. Some people are just mean, honey. It's not about you. It's about her. After Jake left for school, Sarah went back inside and called Carol at the HOA management company. Carol, it's Sarah Martinez again. Linda Hoffman was just on my property taking pictures and measurements. She told my disabled son that his accident was his own fault and that our family thinks we're above the rules. Carol sighed deeply. I'm so sorry, Sarah. Linda has been getting more aggressive lately. Several neighbors have complained about her behavior. What can I do to stop her? Sarah asked. Technically, she has no authority to issue fines or violations, but she's been threatening people anyway. I think you should attend the next HOA board meeting and speak to the actual board members. It's next Thursday at 7 p.m. in the community center. Sarah wrote down the information. Will Linda be there? Probably, Carol said. She attends every meeting even though she's not a board member. But the elected board members are reasonable people. I think they'll listen to you. That afternoon, Sarah researched disability rights laws. She learned about the Americans with Disabilities Act and how it protected people like Jake from discrimination. She also learned about Fair Housing Act, protections for families with disabled members. Sarah called a disability rights lawyer named David Chen. He offered free consultations for families dealing with HOA discrimination. What you're describing is absolutely illegal, David told Sarah over the phone. HOAs cannot prohibit reasonable accommodations for disabled residents, and harassing a disabled child is completely unacceptable. What should I do? Sarah asked. Document everything, David said. Take photos of the ramp and your permits. Keep records of every interaction with this Linda person. If she continues to harass you, we may need to take legal action. David also gave Sarah some important information about HOA rules and disability rights. Federal law required HOAs to allow reasonable modifications for disabled access. The ramp was not just allowed, it was protected by law. Over the next few days, Linda escalated her campaign against the Martinez family. She posted photos of their ramp on the neighborhood social media page with angry comments about special treatment and declining property values. She encouraged other neighbors to complain about the ramp. Most neighbors ignored Linda's posts, but a few people responded with support for her position. A man named Richard Keller wrote, "Rules are rules. No exceptions." A woman named Barbara Chen, no relation to the lawyer, wrote, "I agree with Linda. These modifications should be approved in advance." But more neighbors responded with support for Sarah and Jake. Tommy's mother, Jessica Williams, wrote, "Jake is a sweet kid who's been through enough. Leave this family alone." Marcus's father, David Patterson, wrote, "Linda, you need to find a hobby that doesn't involve harassing disabled children." The online arguments continued for several days. Sarah tried to ignore them, but it was hard to see her family's private situation discussed publicly by strangers. On Monday morning, Sarah found another letter in her mailbox. This one was not certified mail. It was handwritten on Linda's personal stationery. "Mrs. Martinez," the letter said, "your failure to respond to my compliance notice shows a flagrant disregard for community standards. I am documenting your continued violation and will be recommending maximum penalties at the next board meeting. This eyesore has been photographed by multiple neighbors and will be presented as evidence of your family's selfish disregard for property values. Your son's situation does not entitle you to special treatment. Rules are rules." Sarah felt sick reading the letter. Linda was clearly obsessed with their ramp and was not going to give up easily. That evening, Sarah sat down with Jake to prepare him for what might happen at the HOA meeting. "There might be some people who disagree with us," Sarah explained, "but I want you to know that we're doing nothing wrong. The ramp is legal and you need it." Jake nodded. "Can I come to the meeting with you?" he asked. Sarah had been thinking about that. Part of her wanted to protect Jake from any more of Linda's meanness. But part of her thought it might be good for the board members to see the real child that Linda was attacking. "Only if you want to," Sarah said. "You don't have to." "I want to come," Jake said. "I want them to see that I'm just a regular kid who needs a ramp to get into his house." Sarah agreed. She had no idea that the HOA meeting would become a turning point in their battle with Linda, or that Linda's behavior would finally catch up with her in a way she never expected. The day before the HOA meeting, Sarah received an unexpected phone call. The caller identified himself as Michael Chen, the president of the Pine Valley HOA board. "Mrs. Martinez," he said, "I'm calling about the situation with your wheelchair ramp. I wanted to speak with you before tomorrow's meeting." Sarah was surprised. She had expected to meet the board members for the first time at the meeting. "I've been made aware of some correspondence you received from Linda Hoffman," Michael continued. "I want you to know that those letters do not represent the official position of our HOA board." "So you don't want us to remove the ramp?" Sarah asked. Michael paused. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm a father of 2 young children. One of my neighbors has a disabled son. I cannot imagine anyone asking you to remove a ramp that your child needs to access his own home." Sarah felt a wave of relief. "Thank you," she said. "That means a lot to hear." "I should warn you," Michael said. "Linda will probably attend tomorrow's meeting. She's very passionate about what she sees as rule enforcement. But please understand that she does not speak for the board or the majority of our community." After hanging up, Sarah felt more confident about the meeting. But she also knew that Linda would not give up easily. Sarah spent that evening preparing her presentation for the board. She gathered her city permits, photos of the ramp, and printed copies of the federal disability laws that protected her family's rights. She also printed out some of the supportive comments from neighbors on social media. David Chen, the disability rights lawyer, had agreed to attend the meeting with Sarah. He would not charge her unless the situation required formal legal action. Having a lawyer present often makes people think twice about saying discriminatory things, David had explained. The next evening, Sarah and Jake arrived at the community center at 6:45. David met them in the parking lot. Several other neighbors were also arriving for the meeting. The community center had a large meeting room with folding chairs arranged in rows. At the front of the room was a table where the 4 board members sat. Sarah recognized Michael Chen from his profile photo on the HOA website. He was a friendly-looking man in his 40s with kind eyes. Linda Hoffman was already in the front row, surrounded by papers and file folders. She had dressed up for the meeting in a dark blue suit and had her gray hair pulled back severely. She looked like she was preparing for battle. About 30 neighbors had come to the meeting. Sarah recognized some faces from the neighborhood, but she had never spoken to most of them. Jake stayed close to his mother as they found seats in the middle of the room. Michael Chen called the meeting to order at 7 o'clock. He introduced the other board members: Patricia Walsh, a retired teacher, Robert Thompson, an accountant, and Susan Kim, a nurse at the local hospital. "Before we begin with our regular business," Michael said, "we have a special agenda item regarding a compliance concern that has been brought to our attention." Linda immediately stood up. "Thank you, Mr. Chen. As you know, I have documented a clear violation of our architectural standards at 1247 Maple Street." Linda walked to the front of the room and began setting up a small easel with poster boards. Sarah could see that Linda had prepared an elaborate presentation with photos, measurements, and charts. "The Martinez family has installed an unauthorized structure without proper HOA approval," Linda announced. "This 18-foot ramp violates Section 4.2 of our architectural guidelines and Section 6.1 regarding aesthetic standards." Linda pointed to photos of Jake's ramp. "As you can see, this structure is clearly visible from the street and negatively impacts the visual appeal of our neighborhood. Property values in the immediate area have already begun to decline." Sarah felt her anger rising. Linda had no evidence that property values had declined. She was just making things up. Linda continued her presentation for 15 minutes. She quoted HOA rules and talked about maintaining community standards. She never once mentioned that the ramp was for a disabled child. When Linda finished, Michael Chen thanked her and asked if anyone else wanted to speak. Sarah stood up. "I would like to respond to these accusations," she said. Michael nodded. "Please come forward, Mrs. Martinez." Sarah walked to the front of the room with her folder of documents. Jake wheeled himself forward to join her. David Chen also stood up. My name is Sarah Martinez, and this is my son Jake, Sarah began. The ramp that Ms. Hoffman wants removed is the only way my disabled son can access our home independently. Sarah explained about Jake's accident and his need for the ramp. She showed the board her city permits and explained how the ramp met all safety requirements. The ramp is not just legal, Sarah said. It's protected by federal disability rights laws. The Americans with Disabilities Act and the Fair Housing Act require homeowner associations to allow reasonable accommodations for disabled residents. David Chen stepped forward. I'm David Chen, a disability rights attorney. I'm here to confirm that Ms. Martinez is absolutely correct. Federal law not only allows this ramp, it requires the HOA to approve it as a reasonable accommodation. Linda Hoffman jumped to her feet.
Federal law doesn't override our community standards,
she shouted. These people are trying to get special treatment. Michael Chen gavelled for order. Ms. Hoffman, please sit down. You've had your turn to speak, but Linda was not finished. This boy should have been more careful, she said, pointing at Jake. His poor choices don't give his family the right to ignore our rules. A shocked silence fell over the room. Several neighbors gasped. Michael Chen's face turned red with anger. Ms. Hoffman, Michael said sternly, you are out of order. Please sit down immediately or you will be asked to leave. But the damage was done. Linda had just publicly blamed a disabled child for his accident in front of 30 neighbors and 4 board members. Jake looked up at his mother with hurt in his eyes. Sarah put her hand on his shoulder protectively. David Chen stepped forward again. What we just heard was a clear example of disability discrimination, he said calmly. Ms. Hoffman has just demonstrated exactly why federal laws exist to protect families like the Martinezes. Several neighbors began speaking up in support of Sarah and Jake. Tommy's mother, Jessica Williams, stood up. I've known Jake since he was 5 years old, she said. He's a wonderful kid who's been through something terrible. How dare anyone blame him for his accident or try to take away his independence? Other neighbors joined in. Marcus's father, David Patterson, talked about how much Jake loved using his ramp. Mrs. Rodriguez from down the street said she thought the ramp looked nice and well built. Even some neighbors that Sarah had never met spoke up. An elderly man named George Foster said his own father had used a wheelchair and that he understood how important accessibility was. As more neighbors spoke, it became clear that Linda had very little support in the community. Most people were either supportive of the ramp or at least sympathetic to Jake's situation. Patricia Walsh, the retired teacher on the board, asked to speak. I've been a teacher for 35 years, she said. I've worked with many children with disabilities. What I see here is a family trying to help their child live a normal life. That ramp represents independence and dignity for Jake. I cannot imagine why anyone would want to take that away. Robert Thompson, the accountant, agreed. I've reviewed the federal laws that Mr. Chen mentioned. It's clear that we not only can approve this ramp, we must approve it. Susan Kim, the nurse, was the most direct. As a healthcare professional, I understand the importance of accessibility for disabled individuals. This ramp is medically necessary for Jake's independence and mental health. Trying to remove it would be cruel and illegal. Michael Chen called for a formal vote. All those in favor of approving the wheelchair ramp at 1247 Maple Street as a reasonable accommodation for a disabled resident? All 4 board members raised their hands. All those opposed? No hands went up. The motion passes unanimously, Michael said. The ramp is hereby officially approved and will remain in place. The room erupted in applause. Sarah felt tears of relief in her eyes. Jake smiled for the first time all evening, but Linda was not done fighting. She stood up again, her face red with anger. This is a travesty, she shouted. You people are destroying our property values. I won't stand for this. Michael Chen gavelled for order again. Ms. Hoffman, the board has made its decision. This matter is closed. No, it's not, Linda yelled. I'm filing a complaint with the state HOA Oversight Board. I'm contacting a lawyer. This is discrimination against law-abiding homeowners. David Chen stood up. Ms. Hoffman, I would strongly advise you to stop making threats. What you've said tonight about this disabled child could be considered harassment under federal law. Linda glared at David, then at Sarah and Jake. This isn't over, she said before storming out of the meeting. As the meeting ended, many neighbors came up to Sarah and Jake to offer their support. Some apologized for not speaking up sooner about Linda's behavior. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who lived across the street, took Sarah's hands. That Linda has been a problem for years, she said quietly. She's bullied half the neighborhood at one time or another. Maybe now people will finally stand up to her. As Sarah, Jake, and David walked to their cars, David gave Sarah some advice. "You won," he said. The morning after the HOA meeting, Sarah woke up to find 17 text messages on her phone. Word about Linda's behavior at the meeting had spread quickly through the neighborhood. Most of the messages were from neighbors offering support and apologizing for Linda's actions. Jessica Williams, Tommy's mother, had texted, "I can't stop thinking about what that horrible woman said to Jake. Is there anything we can do to help?" Mrs. Rodriguez from down the street wrote, "Linda has bothered my family too. Maybe it's time we all stood up to her together." Even neighbors that Sarah barely knew were reaching out. Someone named Patricia Foster wrote, "My husband George spoke up at the meeting. We want you to know that most people in this neighborhood support you and Jake." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. For months she had felt alone in dealing with Jake's disability and all the challenges that came with it. Now she realized that her community was full of kind people who cared about her family. But not all the messages were supportive. Linda had been busy too. She had sent a long email to every address on the neighborhood contact list. The subject line read, "HOA board violates community standards, legal action required." In the email, Linda claimed that the board had been intimidated by legal threats and had caved to special interest pressure. She accused Sarah of manipulating her child's disability for personal gain and called the ramp a dangerous precedent that will destroy our property values. Linda ended her email with a call to action. All concerned homeowners should contact the state HOA Oversight Board to file complaints against our current board members. We cannot allow emotional manipulation to override our community standards. Sarah read the email with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Linda was now attacking the board members who had supported them. She was also spreading lies about Sarah and Jake, but Linda's email had an unintended consequence. Instead of rallying support for her cause, it showed many neighbors just how unreasonable and mean-spirited she really was. David Patterson, Marcus's father, replied to everyone on the email list, "Linda, your continued attacks on a disabled child are disgusting. You should be ashamed of yourself." Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who had spoken to Sarah after the meeting, wrote back, "I have lived in this neighborhood for 40 years. Linda Hoffman has caused more problems and disputes than everyone else combined. It's time for her to stop." Throughout the morning, more neighbors weighed in on the email thread. The vast majority sided with Sarah and Jake. People shared stories about their own experiences with Linda's harassment over the years. Mike Peterson wrote, "Linda threatened to fine me because my grass was 1 inch too long. She measured it with a ruler. This woman has serious control issues." Jennifer Adams shared, "Linda called the police on my 8-year-old daughter for playing hopscotch on the sidewalk. She said the chalk was defacing public property. The officer told her to stop wasting their time." A man named Carlos Rivera revealed, "Linda tried to get our family in trouble for hanging our flag outside on Independence Day. She said the flagpole wasn't approved by the architectural committee." On Independence Day, as Sarah read these stories, she realized that Linda had been terrorizing the neighborhood for years. People had been dealing with her harassment individually, feeling helpless and alone. But Jake's situation had finally brought everyone together. By noon, the email thread had over 50 responses. Only 3 people had supported Linda's position. Everyone else had either defended the Martinez family or shared their own negative experiences with Linda. Sarah decided to respond to the email thread herself. She wanted to thank her neighbors and also set the record straight about some of Linda's lies. "Dear neighbors," Sarah wrote, "thank you so much for your support of Jake and our family. I want to clarify a few things about our situation. The ramp was built with proper city permits and inspections. It meets all safety and legal requirements. It was approved unanimously by our elected HOA board after they reviewed federal disability laws. Jake uses this ramp every day to go to school and come home. It has given him back his independence after a tragic accident. We are not asking for special treatment. We are simply asking for the same right that every family has, the right for our child to access his own home. Thank you again for your kindness and support." Sarah's email received immediate positive responses. People thanked her for her grace under pressure and praised Jake's courage. But Linda was not giving up. That afternoon, She began going door to door in the neighborhood trying to gather support for her campaign against the ramp. She carried a clipboard and a folder full of papers. Sarah learned about Linda's door-to-door campaign from Mrs. Rodriguez, who called to warn her. "She just came to my house," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "She wanted me to sign a petition to remove Jake's ramp. I told her absolutely not and closed the door in her face." Similar calls came from other neighbors throughout the afternoon. Linda was visiting every house in the neighborhood, but she was not finding much support. Tommy's mother, Jessica, called to tell Sarah about her encounter with Linda. "She started by asking if I was concerned about property values," Jessica said. "When I said no, she got angry and started saying terrible things about Jake. She called him a burden on the community. I told her to get off my property before I called the police." The more people Linda talked to, the more she damaged her own cause. Her aggressive approach and mean-spirited comments about Jake were turning even neutral neighbors against her. By evening, Linda had managed to get only 4 signatures on her petition. Even some of the people who had initially supported her position in the email thread refused to sign when they met her in person. Meanwhile, a counter-movement was forming among the neighbors. Jessica Williams and David Patterson organized an informal meeting at the neighborhood park to discuss Linda's harassment. About 20 neighbors showed up to the park meeting. Sarah and Jake attended, along with many of the families who had children in Jake's school. "We've all dealt with Linda's bullying for years," David Patterson said to the group. "She's made life miserable for a lot of families. But attacking a disabled child is where we have to draw the line." Mrs. Patterson, the elderly neighbor, spoke up. "Linda has filed false complaints against at least a dozen families that I know of. She's cost people money and legal fees and stress. She's turned our neighborhood into a police state." The group discussed Linda's pattern of behavior over the years. Story after story emerged of Linda harassing families over minor issues, filing false complaints, and making life difficult for anyone who didn't meet her standards. "The real problem," said Mike Peterson, "is that we've all dealt with her separately. She picks on one family at a time and the rest of us stay quiet because we're afraid she'll target us next." "That's exactly right," agreed Jennifer Adams. "She's been dividing and conquering for years, but now we're all talking to each other and we can see the pattern." The group decided to take collective action. They would document all of Linda's harassment over the years and present it to the HOA board. They would also support any family that Linda targeted in the future. Jake had been quiet during most of the meeting, but he asked if he could say something. "I just want to say thank you," Jake said to the group. "Before the accident, I didn't really know most of you, but you've all been so nice to me and my mom. That mean lady tried to make me feel bad about needing a ramp, but you guys make me feel like I belong here." Several neighbors had tears in their eyes after Jake spoke. Mrs. Rodriguez hugged him and said, "You do belong here, sweetie. This is your neighborhood too." The meeting ended with neighbors exchanging phone numbers and promising to support each other against future harassment. For the first time since the conflict began, Sarah felt like they had allies. But Linda was not finished. Over the next few days, she escalated her campaign in ways that shocked even the neighbors who thought they knew how far she would go. Linda posted flyers around the neighborhood with photos of Jake's ramp and inflammatory language about special privileges and declining property values. She contacted local news stations, trying to get media attention for her cause. She even started a blog called Pine Valley Property Values, where she published photos of neighbors' homes with critical commentary. But Linda's most shocking move came on Friday afternoon. Sarah was at work when she got a call from Jake's school. Mrs. Martinez, the school secretary, said, "There's a woman here who says she's from the HOA. She wants to speak with Jake about the ramp at your house. We told her she can't talk to students without parent permission, but she's being very insistent." Sarah felt her heart racing. "What's her name?" she asked, though she already knew. "Linda Hoffman," the secretary confirmed. "She says she has official HOA business with your son." Sarah left work immediately and drove to the school. When she arrived, she found Linda in the principal's office arguing with the principal and school secretary. "This is a civil matter," Linda was saying. "I have every right to interview the child about the violations at his home." Sarah burst into the office. "Get away from my son," she said to Linda. "You have no right to be here." Linda turned to face Sarah with a smug expression. The weekend after Linda's visit to Jake's school, Sarah received a phone call that would change everything. The caller was Robert Thompson, the HOA board treasurer. "Mrs. Martinez," Robert said, "I hope I'm not bothering you on a Saturday morning, but something has come to my attention that I think you should know about." Sarah was immediately alert. "What is it?" "Linda Hoffman has been claiming to represent the HOA board in her communications with neighbors and outside parties," Robert explained. "She's been telling people that the board is planning to reverse our decision about your ramp." "That's completely false." Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. "She's been saying that?" "Yes," Robert continued. "But that's not the main reason I'm calling. Michael Chen asked me to do some research into Linda's claims about property values and her authority to issue violations. What I found is very concerning." Robert explained that he had been looking into Linda's background as a self-appointed compliance officer. "I discovered that Linda has been sending official-looking violation notices to residents for over 3 years. She's been using fake HOA letterhead and claiming authority she doesn't have." "I knew she wasn't really an official," Sarah said. "It's worse than that," Robert said. "I found evidence that she's been collecting money from some neighbors. She told at least 6 families that they could pay compliance fees to avoid having violations reported to the board." Sarah was shocked. "She's been taking money from people?" "It appears so. And here's the really shocking part. I had the city building inspector come to look at Linda's own property yesterday. She has multiple serious violations that she's been hiding." Robert explained that Linda's house had an unpermitted deck addition that violated setback requirements. She also had electrical work that wasn't up to code and a septic system that was leaking into the groundwater. The inspector was amazed that someone with so many violations has been harassing other homeowners, Robert said. "He's issuing her citations that could cost her tens of thousands of dollars to fix." Sarah could hardly believe what she was hearing. Linda, who had been terrorizing the neighborhood about minor rule violations, was the biggest violator of all. "There's more," Robert continued. "Michael Chen is calling an emergency board meeting for Monday night. We're going to formally censure Linda and ban her from any HOA enforcement activities. We're also considering filing fraud charges for the money she collected illegally." Sarah thanked Robert for the information and hung up feeling vindicated, but also worried. If Linda was facing serious legal and financial problems, she might become even more desperate and dangerous. Sarah's concerns proved to be justified. On Sunday afternoon, Linda appeared at Sarah's front door. She looked disheveled and angry. Her usually perfect hair was messy, and her clothes were wrinkled. "This is all your fault," Linda said when Sarah opened the door. "Before you and your brat moved in, this was a respectable neighborhood." Sarah started to close the door, but Linda put her foot in the way. "I've lost everything because of you," Linda continued. "The city is making me tear down my deck. I have to pay $20,000 to fix my septic system. My neighbors won't talk to me anymore." "Linda," Sarah said firmly, "you brought all of this on yourself. Now please get off my property." "I know you're the one who reported me to the city," Linda accused. "You're trying to destroy me because I stood up for community standards." Sarah was confused. "I didn't report you to anyone. I don't even know what violations you're talking about." Linda's eyes narrowed. "Don't lie to me. You and your lawyer friend are conspiring against me." At that moment, Jake appeared behind Sarah in his wheelchair. When Linda saw him, her face twisted with rage. "There's the little prince," Linda said sarcastically. "Getting special treatment because he can't walk." Sarah felt her anger boil over. "That's enough," she said. "You're harassing a child." "I'm calling the police, and go ahead and call them," Linda said. "But this isn't over. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kind of people you really are." Linda finally left, but not before taking photos of Sarah's house and ramp with her phone. Sarah immediately called the police to report the incident. On Monday night, the Pine Valley HOA held its emergency meeting. The community center was packed with neighbors who had heard rumors about Linda's violations and fraudulent activities. Michael Chen called the meeting to order and immediately addressed the Linda situation. "The board has discovered that Linda Hoffman has been engaging in unauthorized and fraudulent activities while claiming to represent this HOA," Michael announced. "She has issued fake violation notices, collected money under false pretenses, and harassed residents without any legal authority." Michael presented evidence of Linda's violations and fraudulent activities. The board had collected testimonies from 6 families who had paid Linda's fake compliance fees. They also had Documentation of her unpermitted construction and code violations. Effective immediately, Michael continued. Linda Hoffman is banned from any enforcement activities on behalf of this HOA. Any violation notices or communications from her should be ignored and reported to the board. Patricia Walsh, the retired teacher on the board, spoke next. We also want to apologize to the Martinez family and any other residents who have been harassed by Linda's unauthorized activities. Her actions do not represent the values of this community. Linda was not at the meeting, but several of her few remaining supporters were. Richard Keller, who had previously backed Linda's campaign against the ramp, stood up to speak. With respect to the board, Richard said, I think we're being too hasty here. Linda may have made some mistakes, but she was trying to maintain our community standards. David Patterson immediately responded, maintaining community standards doesn't include harassing disabled children or committing fraud. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly neighbor, also spoke up. I've lived here for 40 years, and Linda Hoffman has caused more problems than everyone else combined. It's time to hold her accountable. The board then called for a formal vote to censure Linda and strip her of any unofficial authority. The vote was unanimous, Michael. Chen also announced that the board was cooperating with police and city officials in their investigations of Linda's activities. We take these matters very seriously, Michael said. No one has the right to impersonate HOA officials or harass our residents. After the official business, many neighbors approached Sarah to express their support and share their own stories about Linda's harassment. Carlos Rivera, whose family had been threatened over their Independence Day flag, told Sarah about Linda's latest desperate move. She came to my house yesterday, Carlos said. She wanted me to sign some kind of petition to recall the entire HOA board. She said you and your lawyer were part of a conspiracy to take over the neighborhood. Jessica Williams, Tommy's mother, had a similar story. Linda called me 3 times this weekend. She kept saying that property values were going to collapse because of Jake's ramp. She sounded completely unhinged. As Sarah listened to these stories, she realized that Linda was spiraling into increasingly erratic behavior. The revelation of her own violations and fraudulent activities had pushed her over the edge. David Chen, the disability rights lawyer, approached Sarah as the meeting was ending. I heard about Linda's visit to your house yesterday, he said. Combined with her behavior at the school, I think we have enough evidence to get a restraining order if you want to pursue it. Sarah was considering this option when Mrs. Rodriguez came over with surprising news. I thought you should know, Mrs. Rodriguez said quietly. Linda's house is up for sale. I saw the realtor putting up a sign this morning. Sarah was shocked. She's moving? It looks like it, Mrs. Rodriguez confirmed. I heard from another neighbor that she can't afford to fix all her code violations. She's trying to sell the house before the city forces her to make the repairs. This news spread quickly among the neighbors at the meeting. Many people seemed relieved that Linda might be leaving the neighborhood. But Sarah knew that desperate people sometimes did desperate things. Linda had already shown that she was willing to go to extreme lengths to harass their family. If she was facing financial ruin and social isolation, there was no telling what she might do next. As Sarah and Jake drove home from the meeting, Jake asked a question that had been on Sarah's mind too. Mom, Jake said, if Linda moves away, does that mean she'll stop bothering us? Sarah looked at her brave son in the rearview mirror. I hope so, honey. But even if she doesn't, we're going to be okay. We have the whole neighborhood supporting us now. Sarah felt cautiously optimistic as they pulled into their driveway. The HOA board had vindicated their position. Linda's fraudulent activities had been exposed and the community had rallied around their family. But Sarah's optimism was premature. Linda Hoffman had one final shocking move that would catch everyone off guard and finally reveal the true extent of her desperation and delusion. 3 days after the emergency HOA meeting, Sarah was awakened at 2 a.m. by a loud noise outside. She looked out her bedroom window and saw a pickup truck parked in front of their house. Someone was on their front lawn with tools. Sarah's heart raced as she realized what was happening. Someone was trying to destroy Jake's ramp. She immediately called 911 while watching from her window. In the dim streetlight, she could see a figure with a crowbar prying at the wooden planks of the ramp. The person was wearing dark clothes and a baseball cap, but Sarah was certain it was Linda. Weapon, what's your emergency? The operator asked. Someone is on my property destroying my disabled son's wheelchair ramp, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice calm. I think it's a neighbor who's been harassing us. We're sending officers immediately, the operator said. Stay inside and don't confront the person. Sarah woke up Jake and told him to stay in his room. She continued watching from the window as the figure worked frantically to damage the ramp. Several wooden boards had been pried loose and the handrail was partially destroyed. Within 5 minutes, Sarah heard sirens approaching. The person on their lawn heard them too and began running toward the pickup truck. But the police arrived before the person could drive away. Sarah watched as 2 police officers got out of their patrol car and approached the pickup truck. They used their flashlights to illuminate the person inside, and Sarah could see that it was indeed Linda Hoffman. The officers spent several minutes talking to Linda and examining the damaged ramp. One officer came to Sarah's front door to take her statement. "Ma'am, we've arrested the suspect for vandalism and trespassing," the officer said. "Can you tell me about your relationship with this person?" Sarah explained the months of harassment that Linda had put their family through. She mentioned Linda's visit to Jake's school, her fraudulent HOA activities, and her desperate behavior after being exposed. "We'll need you to document the damage and get repair estimates for court," the officer explained. "This appears to be a hate crime based on disability, so the charges will be more serious." As the police car drove away with Linda in the back seat, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that Linda had finally been caught in the act, but sadness that someone's hatred and frustration had driven them to attack a disabled child's only means of accessing his home. The next morning, Jake was heartbroken when he saw his damaged ramp. Several boards were broken and the handrail was twisted and unusable. "Why would she do this, Mom?" Jake asked with tears in his eyes. "I never did anything to hurt her." Sarah hugged her son tightly. "Some people have so much anger inside them that they lash out at innocent people," she explained. "It's not about you, honey. It's about our own problems." Within an hour of the damage being discovered, neighbors began arriving to help. Bill Rodriguez, the contractor who had built the ramp, came over with his tools and spare materials. "I can't believe someone would do this to a kid," Bill said, shaking his head. "But don't worry, we'll have this fixed by the end of the day." David Patterson and Mike Peterson showed up with their own tools. Jessica Williams brought coffee and sandwiches for the volunteers. Even elderly Mrs. Patterson came over to supervise and offer encouragement. "This is what real community looks like," Mrs. Patterson told Jake as the men worked to repair his ramp. "When someone tries to tear us down, we build each other back up." By late afternoon, the ramp was not just repaired but improved. The volunteers had reinforced the structure and added decorative elements that made it even more beautiful than before. When Jake tested the repaired ramp, he had a huge smile on his face. "It's even better than before," he told the volunteers. "Thank you so much." That evening, Michael Chen called Sarah with updates on Linda's situation. Linda was charged with vandalism, trespassing, and disability-based hate crimes, Michael reported. Her bail was set at $10,000, and she has a restraining order that forbids her from coming within 500 feet of your property. Michael also had news about Linda's house sale. The buyer backed out when they learned about all the code violations. Linda's facing foreclosure if she can't sell soon. "I almost feel sorry for her," Sarah said, and she meant it. Despite everything Linda had done, Sarah could see that she was a troubled person who had destroyed her own life with hatred and obsession. "Don't feel too sorry," Michael said. "The police found a journal in her truck with detailed plans to harass not just your family, but several other neighbors she considered problem residents. This wasn't just about your ramp. She had become completely obsessed with controlling the neighborhood." Over the next few weeks, more details emerged about Linda's final breakdown. The police investigation revealed that she had been planning acts of vandalism against multiple families. She had photos and notes about other neighbors' supposed violations, and she had been preparing a campaign of harassment against anyone who had opposed her. Linda's lawyer negotiated a plea deal to avoid jail time. She agreed to pay for all damages, complete community service, and undergo court-ordered counseling. Most importantly, she agreed to sell her house and move out of Pine Valley within 60 days. The neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief when Linda's moving truck pulled away 6 weeks later. Several neighbors gathered on the street to watch her leave, not to celebrate, but to mark the end of a difficult chapter in their community's history. Sarah and Jake were among those who watched Linda's departure. Jake had mixed feelings about it. "I'm glad she's gone," Jake said. but I hope she gets help so she doesn't hurt other families. Sarah was proud of her son's compassion, even toward someone who had caused them so much pain. In the months that followed, Pine Valley became a different kind of neighborhood. The experience with Linda had brought neighbors together in ways that hadn't existed before. People who had barely spoken to each other became friends. Parents organized playdates for their children. Elderly residents like Mrs. Patterson found themselves with regular visitors checking on their well-being. The HOA board implemented new policies to prevent future abuse. They created clear guidelines about who could speak for the association and established a formal complaint process for neighbors who felt harassed. Most importantly, they formed an accessibility committee to help other families who might need reasonable accommodations. Sarah was asked to chair the new accessibility committee, and she accepted with pride. The committee's first project was creating a neighborhood accessibility map, showing which homes and businesses were wheelchair-friendly. They also established a fund to help families make accessibility improvements. Jake became something of a neighborhood celebrity, but in the best possible way. Younger children admired his courage and resilience. Parents used his story to teach their children about empathy and inclusion. Jake himself grew more confident and outgoing, realizing that his disability didn't define him or limit his ability to contribute to his community. 6 months after Linda's departure, the Martinez family received an unexpected letter. It was from Linda herself, postmarked from a city 3 states away. Sarah opened it carefully, unsure what to expect. The letter was handwritten and very different from Linda's previous angry communications. Dear Sarah and Jake, I am writing to apologize for my terrible behavior toward your family. I have been in counseling since I moved away, and I am finally beginning to understand how wrong I was. My therapist helped me see that my anger about the ramp had nothing to do with property values or community standards. I was dealing with my own fears about aging and disability. My mother spent her last years in a wheelchair, and instead of helping her, I was ashamed. When I saw Jake using his ramp with such confidence, it reminded me of my own failures as a daughter. That doesn't excuse what I did to you and Jake. I terrorized a child who had already been through trauma, and I tried to take away his independence. I am deeply ashamed of my actions. I am working to become a better person. I volunteer at a disability resource center here, and I'm learning about the challenges that families like yours face every day. The children I work with have taught me about courage and determination. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I am truly sorry. Jake is a remarkable young man, and you are an amazing mother. I hope you both have wonderful lives. Sincerely, Linda Hoffman. Sarah read the letter twice before showing it to Jake. She was surprised to find that she felt no anger toward Linda anymore, only pity for someone who had been so lost in her own pain that she had hurt others. Do you think she really means it? Jake asked after reading the letter. I think she does, Sarah said. People can change when they want to badly enough. Jake was quiet for a moment. Should we write back to her? Sarah was touched by her son's generous spirit. What would you want to say? That I forgive her, Jake said simply, and that I hope she's happier now. Sarah helped Jake write a short reply, telling Linda that they accepted her apology and wishing her well in her new life. They never heard from Linda again, but Sarah hoped that their forgiveness had given her some peace. A year after the ramp controversy began, Pine Valley hosted its first annual Accessibility Awareness Day.